Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. Freilichen Purim. I'm recording this Purim night after my Purim night Suda, meaning Yud Daled. This is Matzai Tainis Esther going into Purim. I'm recording this a couple of hours after hearing the Megillah, but I wanted to make sure to get a share in today so that we can stay on schedule. I know it's going to be too late for most people to hear it, but you'll have to squeeze it in at some point. There just was no way I could record a share earlier in the day. So we are on Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. We're continuing to learn halachos Tefillah. We pick up Siman Kuf Yud Sif Hey, the second line down in the Shulchan Aruch. I'm going to try to do a good piece of Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Beis as well. Today's daf in the Dirshu is daf Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Beis. Be that as it may, says the Mechaber, Siman Kuf Yud Sif Hey, second line down, Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. We're speaking about Tefillas HaDerech. Says the Mechaber, Ein tzarich loymar oisa ela pam achas bayoim. It's only necessary to recite Tefillas HaDerech once during the day. What exactly does that mean? Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Ois Katan Chav Dalet. Says the Chavetz Chaim Pirush. What does the Mechaber mean when he says you only say Tefillas HaDerech once a day? He says, B'chol yom v'yom, each day, kol zman shehu baderech, whenever you go traveling, mechuyev loymar oisa, you're mechuyev to say Tefillas HaDerech. So, if you go traveling on Sunday, you get in the car and you embark on a journey, you say Tefillas HaDerech. However, as long as you're on that journey, you're only going to say Tefillas HaDerech once on that day. So let's give an example. Let's say you, as I do, you live in Staten Island, New York, and you have family in Cleveland. So you get in the car and you're making your way west on Route 80, and you've got a good 7-8 hour trip in front of you. So you're going to be traveling a good piece of the day, an 8-hour trip together with stops. It could be you're going to be traveling most of the day. And along the way, you're going to make stops. You might even make an extended stop at a rest stop somewhere in order to eat lunch, daven mincha, stretch your legs. Maybe you'll stop for an hour. Do you say Tefillas HaDerech when you get back in the car? The answer is no. You embarked on a journey. That day, as long as you're traveling on that day, you're only going to say Tefillas HaDerech once. That's what the Mechaber means here. Ein tzarich loymar oisa ela pam achas bayoim. Continues the Mechaber, afilu im yonuach be'ir be'emtza hayoim. This is true even if you take a rest somewhere in the city in the middle of the day. So you were traveling, and now you pull into a rest stop for an hour and a half. Doesn't matter. You're still only going to say Tefillas HaDerech once. Aval, however, says the Mechaber, im daitoi lolun bo'ir. What if you decide, you know what, we're spending the night. We traveled already a long distance. We're going to stop in a hotel now, and we're going to spend the night. So you go, you park the car, you check into the hotel, nimlach, and then you change your mind, v'yatsa mimena, la'avar chutzala, and now you decide that you're going to continue your travels, and you're going to travel out of the city that you're in now. Oy loshav levesai, or you decide that you're going to return home. In that case, tzarich lachzar ulehispalal oisa pam acheres. Now you would have to say Tefillas HaDerech again. So the example, I think, over here would be, let's say, again, you're heading west on Route 80, and you decide that that's it. You've driven as much as you could drive today. You have to take a break. So you decide, you know what, I'm checking into a hotel, and I'm going to spend the night, or not even spend the night. It could be even you decided you're stopping your trip and you're going to have a significant stopover. You're going to rest for 4 hours, 5 hours. Then you decide, you know what, I checked into the hotel and the room's not very comfortable and the bed is very lumpy and I have the trip too much on my mind and now I'm pushing off my ETA. You know what, I give up. I'm changing my mind. I'm getting back in the car and I'm traveling further. Now, this trip is considered a new trip. Why? Because you embarked on a journey to Cleveland in the morning. You decided to end your journey. and you checked into a hotel. Now you decided that you're picking up your journey and you're going again. You were Mesiach Das. You decided my journey was over. So now you have arrived at your destination for this trip. Now you're starting a new trip. Okay, so if you leave the city from your starting point, you need a new Tefillas HaDerech, even though it's the same day. Let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah. Im yanuach, if you rest. This is in the beginning of the Mechaber, when the Mechaber said that you only say Tefillas HaDerech once during the day, afilu im yanuach ba'ir be'emtza hayoim, even if you make a rest stop. Says the Mechaber Ritzaynei Loymar, what the Mechaber means is, Shemisakiv sham eze sha'os kidei lanuach. If you take a break, this is a rest stop. I'm not ending my journey for the day. My journey is an 8-hour trip to Cleveland, but I need to rest a little bit on the way. So says the Mechaber and explains the Chavetz Chaim Ritzaynei Loymar, Shemisakiv sham eze sha'os kidei lanuach. If you're going to stop for a few hours in order to rest, and then you're going to continue your journey, since when you stopped for your rest in the city limits, your mindset was not that I ended one trip and I'm going to be starting a new trip. Your mindset was, I'm taking a break on the original journey. So then there's no need to go ahead and make another Tefillas HaDerech. This is the first case that I gave you. You left to Cleveland. Now you might stop on the way, not even by a rest stop on Route 80. Maybe you'll decide that you want more than a rest stop. Maybe you'll decide to check in at a Hilton on the side of the road for a couple of hours so you could go get a room and you could sit down and you could eat lunch by a table and you could daven mincha in a room instead of davening mincha in the field. Maybe you even want to hop a shower. But it's all a rest. It's a stop along the journey. It's not that I ended my travels for today. In that case, there's only one Tefillas HaDerech. You made a Tefillas HaDerech in the beginning of your journey, and that covers you for the entire day. Ois Katan Chavav, though, if this is where the Mechaber said, Im daita lolun ba'ir, if you decided that's it, I'm ending my trip for now. Now I'm going to go to sleep. That's it. I've had it. And I'll pick up a new trip later. Then tzarich, then you have to say Tefillas HaDerech over again. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the heavy hesach das, because now you were Mesiach Das from your trip. It's as if you now decided to break your trip in two. You ended the first leg of your journey, and you're going to start a new trip afterwards. Certainly if you stopped overnight, I've done that on the way to Cleveland. You know, you decided you've gone as far as you can. That's it. I'm going to check into a hotel. I'm going to get 4 or 5 hours sleep overnight, and I'm going to start again early in the morning. Then certainly in the morning you have to say a new Tefillas HaDerech. It's even a new day. But if you travel the whole night, let's say you leave New York at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're headed to Cleveland, and you drive, well, let's say Chicago, not Cleveland. We'll make it a longer trip. You drive through the night. You never stop at a hotel or a motel to go to sleep. Maybe you chop an hour somewhere, and then you continue traveling. Then you should say Tefillas HaDerech in the morning, but without the shame. Just say Baruch Shemei Tefillah. V'ayin beBir Halacha, and he says to take a look in the Bir Halacha. I'm just going to read to you what I think are the main 2.5 lines here in the Bir Halacha. If you could go to Bir Halacha Divrei Maskal Tzarich Lachzor L'Spalel, he says, Ayin b'Mishnah Berurah hatam ulefi zeh nireh. According to this, it would seem the cholsh kedim lon bo ushpiza. If you sleep overnight in a hotel, v'hishkim koydem haboker l'nsay l'darkai, and you get up early in the morning before alois, let's say, to go on your trip, the tzarich levarch Tefillas HaDerech av shelo yeheir adayin hayom, even though it's not alois of a new day yet, because certainly when you went to sleep last night, you were Mesiach Das from your trip. That's it. I ended leg 1 of my journey. I'm going to sleep for the night. tomorrow morning I'm continuing my trip, but that's a new trip. So if you're leaving the city limits, you have to say a new Tefillas HaDerech. We also have to keep in mind what we learned in Hilchas Kriya Shema, that you're really not supposed to travel in the morning before davening. Really, before davening, you're not supposed to travel at all. You're supposed to daven before you travel. Okay, now we go to Sivav, 2 lines off the bottom here in Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. Says the Mechaber Haram Merutenberg Kisha Yoytzel Derech Babayker. If it would occur that he had a big tzarech and he had to go traveling early in the morning, he would do an interesting thing. He would say Birchas HaShachar before he left for his trip, and he would say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Hamavir Sheina Me'eino Yisunuma Me'afapai, and then he would say the Yehiratzen, and he would end off Baruch Atah Hashem Gomel Chasadim Tovim La'ama Yisrael, and then he would go straight into Tefillas HaDerech. Yiratzen L'Fadach Hashem Elokeinu V'Kel Yiseinu Shetaylicheinu L'Shalom V'Sadvicheinu L'Shalom, etc., etc. Why did he do this? Explains the Mechaber, the reason he did this is Kedei Lahasmicha L'Berchas HaGomel Chasadim, so that he could bring Tefillas HaDerech, which does not start with a baruch. Remember everything that we learned about a bracha smucha l'chaverta, right? You have a bracha kitzara and a bracha arucha. You have a bracha that's pesach b'baruch and chaysemis b'baruch, or a bracha that's pesach b'baruch but it's not chaysim b'baruch. Sometimes you have a bracha that's not pesach b'baruch and it is chaysim b'baruch. That's Tefillas HaDerech. Tefillas HaDerech is not pesach b'baruch. It starts Yehiratzen at the end by the Chasima Baruch Atah Hashem Shemei Tefillah, but it's not Pesach b'Baruch. So what the Maram Rutenberg would do is he would recite Tefillas HaDerech right after saying Baruch Atah Hashem Gomel Chasadim Tovim Lama Yisrael, so that he could turn Tefillas HaDerech into a bracha smucha l'chaverta. So now it should have a psicha and a chasima. Very interesting. V'tia bracha smucha l'chaverta. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Kol Chav Zayin, L'Derech Ba'Boker. First, says the Chavetz Chaim, what are we talking about over here that Maram Rutenberg was traveling in the morning? We said that it's not so pashut to travel in the morning before davening. Well, certainly before Kriya Shema. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Pirish, Kishaya Nachutz L'Pa'amim Leilech L'Derech Ba'Boker Kaidam HaTfilah. When it was Nachutz, when it was very urgent, there was some kind of crisis and he needed to daven. He needed to leave early in the morning. He had a big tzarech. He would then say Birchas HaShachar once he started on the road. So he would get on the road, say Birchas HaShachar, and then he would connect Tefillas HaDerech to the Yehiratzen. Now, there's a reason why the Chavetz Chaim is saying it this way. Why he's saying that he said Birchas HaShachar on the road, because we're going to see a little bit further when we turn the page that you're supposed to say Tefillas HaDerech when you already started the trip. You're not supposed to say Tefillas HaDerech before you started the trip. So it can't be what the Maram Rutenberg did was he got up early and in his house he said Birchas HaShachar and then he connected Tefillas HaDerech to Birchas HaShachar, because it would be inappropriate to say Tefillas HaDerech at that point. He didn't leave on his journey yet. Elamai, the Chavetz Chaim is saying, what the Maram Rutenberg must have done was, he got up, he started his journey, right? He got into the wagon, and when the wagon started going, he said Birchas HaShachar, and then he connected Tefillas HaDerech to Birchas HaShachar, and he recited Birchas HaShachar during the first parsa of his trip. If he was going to be traveling after davening, you can't say Tefillas HaDerech before davening. You're not allowed to start Tefillas HaDerech until you're actually traveling. He did this in order to turn Tefillas HaDerech into a bracha smucha l'chaverta she'ena pesachas bebaruch, because Tefillas HaDerech does not start with a baruch. Starts Yehiratzen, and he wanted to make it a bracha smucha l'chaverta. What would the Maram Rutenberg do if he was leaving on his journey in the middle of the day? How do you turn it into a bracha smucha l'chaverta then? So the Chavetz Chaim says, Yasmichel bracha acheres. Be masmich Tefillas HaDerech to a different bracha. Kigain, for example, sheyoich lo yishte eze davar, eat or drink something. V'yavarich bracha achrona o yatel mayim v'yomer asher. What you could do is you could take a drink, make a shahakol, take a drink. When you finish your drink, you have to make a bar nefashos. So say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Bar nefashos rabbis chesrona kamash b'ras alachis b'em nefesh kol chay. Baruch chei ha'olamim yihi ratzon l'fanecha Hashem Elokeinu v'klei v'seinu shetay l'keinu l'shalom. And make Tefillas HaDerech a bracha smucha l'chaverta in that way. Or he says, O yatal mayim will go to the Beis HaKisei. The yomer asher yotzar, say asher yotzar, and then say Tefillas, then start your journey and say Tefillas HaDerech, and be masmich Tefillas HaDerech to asher yotzar. Uvamakim shein yochalas is calls it, says the Chavetz Chaim. I mean, this is something most people have never even heard of. The idea of turning Tefillas HaDerech into a bracha smucha l'chaverta, says the Chavetz Chaim, uvamakim shein yochalas is calls it. If you don't have the ability to do this, kigoyin she'en lo al malavarich, you don't have a snack or a drink to make a bracha on. V'gamu yoshev ba'agolo bein anoshim, and you're already sitting on the wagon with other people. Ve'enam roitzim lahantam alav achiyerid v'yale, and then I'm interested in waiting for you to go use the facilities and come back so that you can be masmich Tefillas HaDerech to asher yotzar. Afal Pikein, turn the page to Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Beis. Afal Pikein, says the Chavetz Chaim, mutter loymar Tefillas HaDerech. Certainly you could say Tefillas HaDerech. The Kamer Rishonim Seivrim, the Tefillas HaDerech ain't tzricha shetieh smucha l'chaverta. A lot of Rishonim hold that there's no need to make Tefillas HaDerech a bracha smucha l'chaverta. Ayin Betur u'Beis Yosef. I would venture to say that most people have never even heard of this. So certainly we're not makpid to make Tefillas HaDerech a bracha smucha l'chaverta. Continues the Chavetz Chaim with some eitzos, an eitzah tova for when you're traveling. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Noihagen, the minig is, litel rishus me hagedolim, to ask rishus, permission, from a gadol before you embark on a journey, umisparchim, so that you should get a bracha from them, kishaholchim baderech, when you travel on the road. V'yesh smach, and there is a support for this, in a Maimer Chazal. V'yesh smach b'ma she'amru Chazal, there's a support for this, and what Chazal say, the Gemara in Brachas Gimel Amud Beis, Nimlochim b'Sanhedrin. The Gemara recites over there how the Chachmei Yisrael would come into David HaMelech to discuss the country's problems with David HaMelech. And they would say, Amcha Yisrael tzrichet parnasa. You didn't need parnasa. And there's a whole back and forth in the Gemara over there. I have an interesting pshat in that Gemara. Maybe one day I could say it over here. It's not the time for it now. But in any case, at the end of that Gemara, it says that David HaMelech tells them, L'chu pishru yidechem b'gdud. You know what's good for the economy? War is good for the economy. When you have a war, suddenly you have to ramp up steel production, ammunitions production, and the defense industrial complex generates a lot of jobs and a lot of economic activity. But it says over there, David HaMelech tells them, if you're going to go out to war, you better ask Rishus from Sanhedrin. Why? So Rashi explains, the reason you ask Rishus from Sanhedrin is so that Sanhedrin should give you a bracha and they should be mispalo for you. You're going out to a gdud, you're going out to war. War is a dangerous activity. So you need the tefillas of Sanhedrin. So go ask Sanhedrin for Rishus. So too over here, you're going out to a journey could be dangerous. Go to a gadol, ask Rishus so that he should be mispal for you. So v'yesh smach b'ma she'amru Chazal nimlochin b'Sanhedrin. Upirish Rashi explains, not to Rishus, take Rishus from Sanhedrin. Why? Kidei sheyispalalu aleim, so that they should be mispal for you. Next, eitzah tova when going on a journey, says the Chavetz Chaim, v'yikanes b'chi tov, v'yetzei b'chi tov. Gemara in the beginning of Psachim, that when you go on a journey, you should go out b'chi tov, when it's a good time, v'yetzei b'chi tov, and you should go out when it's ki tov. What does this mean, ki tov? Says the Chavetz Chaim, v'hainu b'shachris, this means that you should leave in the morning, b'neitz hachama, after sunrise, when it's light outside, uba'arvis, and you should make sure to arrive at night, tchilas hashkia, at the beginning of shkia, at the beginning of sunset. You should travel while it's light. Why is that called ki tov? Because Vayar alikim as ha'or ki toiv. The light was good. We also have the same thing by Moshe Rabbeinu. When Moshe Rabbeinu was born, it says that Vayar oisoi ki toivhu. They saw that he was toiv. Chazal say, what does that mean? They saw that Moshe Rabbeinu was toiv. Ki nismale kalabayis oira. The entire room, the entire house was filled with light. Light is toiv. Incidentally, why is light toiv? The reason light is toiv is because light is something which allows you to enjoy the benefits of everything else that is good. You could have a room that's full of wonderful things. It might be full of wonderful food. It might be full of wonderful kalim. But if it's pitch black, you can't use anything because you can't find it and you can't use it and you trip over it and you don't know what you're doing. So, but now shed light on the situation and now you could enjoy all of the toiv. That's why light is called toiv. That's also why Chava, incidentally, was called toiv. When the Rebbe Shalom said, Loi toiv, hayois adam levadoi. It's not toiv for man to be alone. Es eloi ezer kenegdoi. Without the woman, without a wife, without the ezer kenegdoi, there's a lack of toiv. When you bring in the ezer kenegdoi, when you give a husband a wife, now suddenly he has toiv. Why? Because the wife is the facilitator that allows the husband to accomplish everything that he should be able to accomplish. Absent his other half, absent his wife that fills in everything that he's missing and facilitates him to grow and to accomplish, he can't accomplish. So again, the wife is the facilitator, so the wife is called toiv. Okay, let's go weiter over here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why is it important to travel when it's light outside? Because if you're traveling when it's dark, you could fall into a dangerous ditch, a bad pothole. Therefore, if you're traveling close to home, you could travel even at night. You know, I'll never forget when I was younger, you know, you have this very false sense of security when you're in a car. I'll never forget, I was a bacher, and it was not long after I had gotten my license, and I was driving upstate during the summer, and I was traveling late at night. Must have been about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was on Route 17, and my car died on the side of Route 17 at 2 o'clock in the morning. And you go very quickly from having a false sense of security. You're sitting in your car, and you think everything is fine and dandy. Suddenly your car dies, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, it's foggy and pitch black outside, and you're in the middle of nowhere on Route 17. And suddenly you realize how incredibly vulnerable you are. And I remember I never appreciated seeing a state trooper as much as I did then. Usually you cringe when you look in the mirror and you see the trooper. That time I looked and I saw the trooper, and boy, was I happy. And when he came to my window, he laughed, he smiled, he said, "This time you're happy to see me, right?" I said, "You got it, my friend. Boy, am I happy to see you." So traveling at night is nisht pashut. Chazal say, Yetzei b'ki tov, you should go out b'ki tov, and yikanes b'ki tov. Says the Chavetz Chaim. No, now we go to Siv Zayin, top line, Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Beis in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mechaber, when is the proper time to recite Tefillas HaDerech? Says the Mechaber, Omer Oisa, you should recite Tefillas HaDerech achar shehechazik baderech, after you've already embarked on your journey. You don't recite Tefillas HaDerech in the house before you get in the car. You get in the car and you start traveling. You say Tefillas HaDerech after you start traveling. Ve'ein la'amra, and you're not to say Tefillas HaDerech, ela im ken yesh lo leilech parsa, unless you're going to travel at least a parsa away from your home. Parsa is 8,000 amos. 8,000 amos. 8,000 amos. 8,000 amos. I guess is between 15,000, be'erich 15,000 feet, or something like that. A mile is 5,000. It's a mile, 5,700 feet, something like that. So it's about 3 miles a parsa. So you don't say Tefillas HaDerech elim ken yesh lo leilech parsa. Aval pachas bi parsa lo yachtoim babarach. But if you're going to travel less than a parsa, you don't say the shame when you say Tefillas HaDerech. Says the Ramah, Ulechatchila yomer oisa beparsa rishona. Lechatchila, you should say Tefillas HaDerech during the first parsa of your journey. But it means the first parsa out of the city. Because when we say over here, when the Mechaber says that you don't say Tefillas HaDerech unless you're going to travel a parsa, it means a parsa out of the city. If you're remaining in the city, so for me, if I live in Staten Island and I drive to Manhattan, if I'm driving to downtown Manhattan, it's approximately 22 miles. It's definitely more than a parsa. It's 17. You know what? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's 17 miles or 22 miles. But whatever it is, it's definitely more than a parsa. But I'm staying within the city. I'm never leaving the city. So therefore, I wouldn't say Tefillas HaDerech at all. Maybe say it without a shame. Maybe. When he says that you say Tefillas HaDerech if you're going to travel more than a parsa, it means more than a parsa out of the city limits. That's when you say Tefillas HaDerech. And now the Ramah says here that lechatchila you should say it during the first parsa out of the city limits. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah Kanachav Tes. You say it shehechzik b'derech after you already embark on the journey. Says the Chavetz Chaim Ritzayin Loymar. What the Mechaber wants to say is shaloyom rena kishadayin hu b'soicha ir shedarba. You don't say Tefillas HaDerech while you're still within your city limits. Af shemeichin atzmai lotzeis laderech. Even though you're preparing to leave the city, you still don't say Tefillas HaDerech while you're within the city limits. The ibura shel ir, and what we call in Erevin language, the ibura shel ir. Literally, ibura shel ir means the pregnancy of the city. What does that mean? A woman who's expectant, right? She has the bulge of the expectancy. So the city, so to speak, in Erevin terms, in Tchum terms, has an ibura, has a bulge that's considered part of the city. What is that? What's the distance of that? The Chavetz Chaim identifies it. V'ibura shel ir, dahainu shivim ama uma'at yoiser, 70 and 2/3 amas beyond the city limits. Yoiser samach l'ir, if you're within that area close to the city, la'achar shekvar kalu kalabatim, even if you're already out of civilization, the houses have ended, hareu k'toich ir, that's still considered part of the city. V'ataz matir afilu b'soich ir, the Taz is matter to say Tefillas HaDerech with the shame, even within the city. Shagamar b'libo ve'echaratz b'lotzes, as long as you already decided that you're going on a journey and you're getting ready to leave. Aval el yarabba v'apri begadim u'shari achreinim cholken al zeh, they disagree. V'eskimu, and they reach a conclusion, a consensus. The lechatchila yesh lizayar, lechatchila you should take care. Shaloi lasos kei, not to rely on the Taz, not to say Tefillas HaDerech within the city limits. Ach b'di'evet yesh l'svach advarav. Now this is only true when you're first embarking on your journey. But if you made a stopover on the way, so this goes back to what we were discussing in the beginning of the shir. What the Chavetz Chaim seems to be saying over here is, let's say you left New York to go to Cleveland, and in the middle of Route 80, you stopped and you slept for 4 or 5 hours overnight in the Hilton on the side of the road. Now you got up early in the morning to leave. When do you say Tefillas HaDerech now? Do you have to wait to leave the city limits of the Hilton, where the Hilton was? Says the Chavetz Chaim, no. Because even though we're requiring you to say Tefillas HaDerech again, because this is like the second leg of your journey, and you had a Hesach Hadas from the first leg of your journey, but from 30,000 feet, overall, this is still part of your trip to Cleveland. And therefore, you don't have to wait until you leave the city limits of where the Hilton is to say Tefillas HaDerech, because you're already out of the city limits of your home. Interesting. Later on, in Siman Reish Lamed, we'll discuss a specific tefillah that you say when you leave the city and when you go into a new city. Ois Kat Lamed. The Mishnah Berurah said, "Ve'ein la amra el im ken yesh lo leilach parsa." You only say Tefillas HaDerech if you're going to travel at least a parsa outside of the city limits. Explains the Chavetz Chaim why is this? Shepachas mi parsa bekarov la'ir, because as long as you're within a parsa of the city, einay makom sakana min astam. Usually when you're so close to the city, that does not yet constitute a makom sakana that you should have to say Tefillas HaDerech. Im loy shemutzak lan b'isay makom shu makom sakana. Unless you know that it is a makom sakana, az yesh lavarich Tefillas HaDerech b'chol gavni. Then you should always say Tefillas HaDerech. I think, select in the words of the Chavetz Chaim over here, that sometimes you say Tefillas HaDerech even if you don't leave the city limits. I mean, if you're driving through downtown Baltimore, or you're driving down downtown Philly, where it looks like a third world country, or you're driving through downtown Newark, where it looks like a third world country, and all the houses are boarded up, and the streets are littered with drug paraphernalia, and there's gangs hanging out on every corner, maybe you say Tefillas HaDerech even within the city limits. Ve'ein chilik, and that is an interesting piece of Mishnah Berurah that gave me pause. I had to struggle to understand what he's saying over here. We just said that you don't say Tefillas HaDerech unless you're going to travel a parsa. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ve'ein chilik bein hoilech b'sfina lahoilech b'yabasha. He brings down from the Eliyah Rabbah that in the context of this halacha, there's no difference if you're traveling on land or you're traveling on a ship. What's the point? What does the Eliyah Rabbah mean? I believe what the Eliyah Rabbah means is like this. You might think that if you're traveling by ship, you should say Tefillas HaDerech immediately, even if you're not traveling a parsa, because a ship is an inherent sakana. Forget if I'm not traveling a parsa. If I'm on the Staten Island ferry, right? So I don't know what the exact difference that the exact distance that the Staten Island ferry travels in miles, in parsas. But if I'm on the Staten Island ferry, I'm on a ship, right? A ship, by the way, I don't know if people even realize, the maximum capacity, at least of the old ferries, they just got new ones, was 6,000 people. 6,000 people. That's how many people fit on a Staten Island ferry. This is not a boat. This is not a little boat. There's a ship, the Staten Island ferry. So you might think that when I take a journey by ship, there's an inherent sakana. I'm traveling on the Yam. So what's the difference if it's a parsa or it's not a parsa? Right away, I should have to say Tefillas HaDerech. Says the Eliyah Rabbah, no. The rule of a parsa applies even to a ship. If you're traveling a parsa, you say Tefillas HaDerech. You're traveling less than a parsa, you don't say Tefillas HaDerech. Let's see it inside here. Ve'ein chilik ben hoilech b'sfina lo'hoilech b'yabasha. That's the Eliyah Rabbah. Ulefizeh, and according to this, says the Chavetz Chaim, gam hanoiseya al mesilas habarzel. So too those who travel by railway. Literally, mesilas habarzel means the iron path, the track, the metal track. This is a railway. Those who travel by train on the railways, yesh loy levarich Tefillas HaDerech, they should say Tefillas HaDerech, afilu im noisea rak parsa. If they're only going to travel a parsa, they should say Tefillas HaDerech. If they're going to travel less than a parsa, they shouldn't say Tefillas HaDerech. But if they're traveling a parsa, they should say Tefillas HaDerech. Now, what does he mean, afilu? I think what he might mean by afilu is realize that there's an aspect of chumrah to a svina or to a mesilas habarzel in that you would think when you're traveling by one of these modern contraptions, you're traveling on a ship or a train, there's like an inherent danger, so you should say Tefillas HaDerech even less than a parsa. Le'idach gisa, if you're telling me that there's a certain minimum distance, you might think that that minimum distance is longer than a parsa on a train. Why? Because how long does it take a train to move a parsa? Right? A train travels a parsa in much less time than you travel a parsa by foot over land or by wagon over land. So maybe we have to adjust the parsa for the amount of time it takes to travel. Says the Chavetz Chaim, in both cases, no. The Eliyah Rabbah told me that on a svina, you say Tefillas HaDerech if you're going to travel a parsa. If you're not going to travel a parsa, you don't, even though it's on a svina. So too at the mesilas habarzel, you say Tefillas HaDerech if you're going to travel a parsa. But you say Tefillas HaDerech even if you're only going to travel a parsa, even though it might only take you 10 minutes to travel the parsa, or 5 minutes to travel the parsa. Continues the Chavetz Chaim, and he says, Ulafizeh, according to this, Yesh li zayar lechatchila. Lechatchila, you should be careful. Tekif kishemaschil unsaya. As soon as the train starts moving, levarich birkas Tefillas HaDerech. You should start Tefillas HaDerech right away. Ukamaycha kasav haramah b'samuch the lechatchila yahadu tarich parsa rishona. Because lechatchila you have to say Tefillas HaDerech during the first parsa, and on a train the first parsa is minutes. So when you're traveling on land and you're traveling by horse and buggy, the parsa takes a while. So, you can get settled, you can start your trip, you can have a snack, and then you can say Tefillas HaDerech. Says the Chavetz Chaim, not on a train. On a train, you got to be careful to say Tefillas HaDerech right away, because how long does it take to travel a parsa? And you're supposed to say Tefillas HaDerech during the first parsa. B'di'eved yavarech ad l'b'soif. B'di'eved, you could say the bracha all the way to the end of the trip. As long as there's still a parsa left to the trip on the railway. Parsa is 8,000 amas. The milhu alpayim amma, because a mil is 2,000 amas, uparsu arba milin, and a parsa is 4 mil. Thus a parsa is 8,000 amas. When you travel by plane, Reb Ruven, my Rebbe, my Rebbe Reb Ruven Feinstein Shlita says that you say Tefillas HaDerech as soon as the wheels leave the ground. As soon as the wheels leave the ground, that's when you say Tefillas HaDerech. Ois cotton lamed beis. Ava pachas bi parsa. If you're traveling less than a parsa, you don't say Tefillas HaDerech. Umipnei zeh, because of this, kishechet babin haderech b'sach parsa. When somebody comes from a travel of less than a parsa, minhag ha'olam shaloi litin lo shalom, you don't say, give him a big shalom aleichem. Dein zeh mikbi babin haderech. That's not called returning from a journey. Taha'ina Tefillas HaDerech, because you don't even say Tefillas HaDerech. Ois cotton lamed gimel. Oh, we didn't do that yet. Let's take a look. Finish off Siv Zayin over here. Third line down, near the beginning of the line, says the Mechaber, V'im shachach mila amra. If you forget to say Tefillas HaDerech in the beginning of the trip, Yomar Isa, you could still say it, Kol Zman Shu B'derech, as long as you're still on the journey. U'balvad shelo yigia tarich parsa smucha le'ir sheretz alolun ba. As long as you're not within a parsa of your destination city, where you're going to be overnight, because then, again, you added a makom sakana. If you are within the city limits, you would say it without a bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kat Lamed Gimel, Tak Parsa, Fa'afilu im bedaito lisa oid achakach kama parsais me'ir zu. Even if you know your journey's not finished, you're arriving at this city and you're going to sleep here, but tomorrow morning you're going to continue your journey. Hu nesiyah b'ftei that tomorrow's a new trip. V'hashtu al kol panapakas bi parsa, but now you're within a parsa of this city's limits. Like a sakana, and it's no longer considered a makaim sakana. Okay, we're going to stop over here with Sifches. Baruch Hashem, we're on the page. Everyone should have a Freilichen Purim. I'm not sure if tomorrow's shir, when I get to say it, might be a little happier. We'll see. Baruch Hashem, Simcha Shel Torah, there's no such thing as not happy as long as we're learning Torah. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Ram Shem should say Yeshua's before us, Parnasa Shidduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek. B'mehera v'yameinu, Amen. Be well.